So I'm just going to talk a little bit about kind of my background, how I got into coaching, my little story, kind of give the short version of that, how I found ATG, what I've been using it for, what about it kind of drew me to there, some of the principles and philosophies that Ben's talked about, what ones have stood out to me, and how I've applied that in my personal practice and in my own coaching with my clients and with my athletes, as well as kind of some results of that and what I'm focusing on now in terms of training. So I got into training pretty early on in high school. Me and a couple of buddies were some like clowns that would go to the gym at like 5 a.m. before like first period and go and like do your classic like bro stuff and go get your lifts and then show up late to class. So that was kind of got into that very early on. My focus was always on athletics. So I was a soccer player, still is my kind of big background. And my real emphasis, all of my goal with training was, how can I become a better athlete? How can I become a better soccer player? That's always been my interest and my draw to strength training, training in general, is how can we upgrade this like thing that we are, kind of physical machine that is our body? Like, what can we do in the gym to make ourselves bigger, faster, stronger? Like that whole kind of American paradigm. And that is what drew me to strength training. That was my focus early on. I did end up making it into college. I played in a little D2 school in Melbourne, but I never really had the athletic carryover that I wanted from the gym. Like, I saw plenty of results in terms of getting bigger, getting stronger. My first semester, my freshman year, with access to a dining hall and all you can eat food and go in there and stuff in your face like 4 times a day, along with like tons of training, I put on like 16 pounds in like the first like 6 months that I was there. But again, never became that better athlete. So I'll talk a little bit about my performance stuff later, but I ran a 5.2 flat. I was proud of my freshman year in the 40-yard dash. So for any of you guys that are not American and not used to the 40-yard dash times, if you're running over 5 seconds, you're probably going to get laughed at. So like, I overachieved as an athlete in terms of being technical, being intelligent, but in terms of like physical talent and things like that, was definitely not there. On top of that, going into my freshman year, I broke my ankle playing, had surgery on that the day after my 18th birthday. Actually, that was a great time. And then went through that rehab process. And that was kind of my first introduction to the world of physical therapy and rehab and that sort of thing. And that is something that has become an emphasis of mine now. I'll talk a little bit about that later on, the kind of discrepancy between just qualities of rehabs, between where you go, but then also the disconnect between sports medicine and strength and conditioning and personal training and rehab, and how these realms don't necessarily talk to each other. From there, that's kind of when I started getting into actual personal training. So when I was at Florida Tech, it was a tech school. I thought I was going to be an engineer. Stuck that out for like 3 years before I finally gave up on that route and got into personal training and coaching athletes. We were pretty understaffed as a school. Athletics was not a big focus for us. So we had like 2 strength coaches for our entire program. So I asked the coach if I could help out coaching some of the teams, and he was all for it. So I was working with the football team. We had like 6 groups because our weight room was so small that we could only fit probably like 20 guys in there at a time. And so 6 different groups would come in throughout the day. They'd all be doing basically the same workout, and I'd kind of just help put him through. And by the end of the semester, like, I still had no qualification at this point, like no PT certification, nothing. Like, I would help shadow him during the first 3 sessions, like would help kind of coach guys and stuff like that. And he would just leave and go to his office, and like, I would just run the session, which was wild. Like, I was like 18, no, it was like, yeah, I was like 19, 20 years old at the time, no PT certifications, like had absolutely no business doing any of this. But it was a great like kind of intro into the coaching world and into the world of kind of strength and conditioning in general. And that was where I started to get a feel for kind of what that environment is like. Since then, I've coached in 2 different Division II college weight rooms at Florida Tech and at Rollins. Here at UCF, I'm finishing up my master's right now in exercise science. We've been a strength coach in that weight room and in some of those kind of more classic kind of private sports performance facilities. So I've gotten to see a little bit of the different methodologies, some of the different thought processes behind these kind of institutions. And that's part of, I guess, the draw of ATG for me. So I first found Ben on Instagram. I got started kind of early days, so all the way back in early 2019 when he was still sending out emails every day and that sort of thing, and was fortunate enough to be in Orlando when he was still in Clearwater. So it was just a couple hours away. So I actually hit him up on Instagram, asked if I could come out. He'd never met me before, and was super incredibly gracious. I was like, yeah, absolutely. Went out, kind of checked out the facility, hung out for the day, got to pick his brain for about some stuff. And what really kind of drew me to the system, and to him and to was the results that he was getting in that gym. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the philosophies and some of the principles and things like that and how they get used, but really like just seeing the products that were coming out of it, not like his own story alone is kind of incredible. And there aren't really many others like it in terms of transformation, not just where he is now, like that's already a very high level, but from where he's gone to, like that progress, like that's all our goals, right? So my thing was like results are going to speak for themselves. Like I hadn't seen a result like that anywhere else. And then when he was started to talk about his football teams, coaching a K through 12 football team, and the amount of Division I scholarship offers that he had from this tiny little high school that was supposed to have no recruitment and things like that, taking basketball players that were unrecruited as centers and getting them Division I scholarship offers as like guards and things like that. Like those kind of results really stood out to me, and it was like, okay, there's something to this. This was still very early on in my kind of coaching training days. So there's not a lot of stuff that I understood as like a coach to be like, okay, yes, this makes sense. But I could look at the product and see like, okay, there's something to this. I mean, so that's what really got me into ATG to start off. And two of the things that really stood out to me. Back in the day when all of the group was still together, there was a podcast they did about the 8 pillars of athletic performance. I don't know if you guys can still find that, but I would definitely recommend checking that out if you can. All 8 of them are really good, but these 2 ideas more than anything really stood out to me. The one was this idea of strength through length that we're now starting to talk about with short range strength and long range strength and strength curves and different things like that. And then the other was this idea of structural balance. So with strength through length, it's the most visual. Obviously, when you see somebody doing a split squat and things like that, you can obviously see that there's something different to that than a barbell back squat, front squat, deadlift, whatever that is. And this idea of strength curves was something that really made a lot of sense to me, because coming from college weight rooms and things like that, like you see that the emphasis is very much on load and on completion rather than obviously range of motion. Like there's very big on, box squats, like the squat, bench, deadlift paradigm, right? But we're going to throw in some cleans that are a little bit more like upright rows than anything else. Some box squats, some box jumps, everything that's going to be about power production rather than necessarily development. And so this idea that for the majority of muscles and joint angles and movements, we're going to be able to produce the strongest, the most force, or we're going to be the strongest in the middle part of a movement. So if you think about like a bell curve, right? If you think about a bicep curl, it's going to be relatively light, the weight in the bottom because of gravity. Then in about that midway point, that's where the exercise is about the hardest. And then at the top again, it's not that hard. So you just think of leverages and where gravity is pointing, where your hand is farthest away from your body. That's where gravity is going to be the most because the weight's farthest away from you. So that's where the exercise is going to be the hardest, is that middle part of the exercise. You think about the same thing with a squat, with a bench, like where is that sticking point essentially? So if you think about where is the sticking point for the majority of all the exercises that you think about in the gym, the squat, the bench press, the front squat, the deadlift, that sticking point is almost always like right in that mid range, right? There's a little bit of wiggle room, but so that's where the exercise is going to be the hardest. That's where we're going to develop the furthest. That's where we're going to develop the most strength. But within that, most muscles, joints, we're also going to be the strongest in that mid range. So that's where we get this bell curve idea, right? Not only is a bicep curl going to be the hardest in that mid range, but if I go through and test my strength and my bicep at different ranges of motion, I'm going to be relatively weak in this extended position, relatively weak in this top position, and relatively strong in this mid position. So that bell curve kind of matches up with where these exercises are developing us. And so the idea is if I'm maximally developing that mid-range strength where I'm already the strongest, I'm just making that discrepancy between my end ranges or my weakest strength and my highest strength even greater. And so is that bell curve ever going to be flat? No, we don't want it to be. We're always going to be stronger in the mid-range. But when we make that too steep, that's when we start to see either these plateaus or these injuries or whatever it is, this loss of performance. And so everywhere that I was looking in the weight room, everything was focused on this mid-range. If there was some outer range stuff, like it was very like light, it was an accessory, it was an afterthought. We might have had some kind of outer range stuff for biceps and triceps just to get like supersets in there and that sort of thing. But that was one thing that really stood out to me about the ATG system is when we think of those big 4 knee exercises, right? We've got our step ups, we've got our split squats, we've got our VMO squats, we've got our KOT squats. You go right down the line and each of those targets a different part of that strength curve. And that idea kind of really stood out to me as making a lot of sense from a health perspective in terms of just not like screwing ourselves up, but then also from a strength and performance perspective. Like if I'm only ever going to train this mid-range, I'm going to limit myself in terms of the gains and the adaptations that I can make. If I train 4 different ranges, now I have 4 different ranges that I can build strength in, that I can see progress. So this was one of the first things that really stood out. The other one is this idea of structural balance. And so this is where we talk about like ratios from either front to back in terms of muscle groups, in terms of how strong your anterior chain compared to your posterior chain, but then also top to bottom, leg to leg. So I'm not going to be more dominant on my left leg versus right leg. Soccer players, we tend to be very dominant towards our plant leg. It's going to be a lot stronger, going to be a lot more stable, but then also even more so from joint to joint. So how does my ankle compare to my knee, compared to my hip? That was really starting to get interesting in terms of muscular development and power. Like, okay, so not only are we training these very kind of mid to even short ranges in the weight room, but everything's going to be very hip dominant in terms of, again, loading our deadlifts, our cleans, and our kind of short range squats that are like these like kind of low bar squats, different things like that. Everything was kind of very focused on developing power in the hips. Then after that, okay, we wanted to have kind of strong thighs, strong knees, and then the ankles and things like that were an afterthought. Everything like is heels flat on the floor, pushing through the heels. So we were creating this discrepancy where I felt like we were not optimally developing everything. And this is the idea of where we come in and kind of we're screwing ourselves up with our training. Like if we just stay out of the way, we're naturally built proportionally strong, structurally different things like that. But then when I go and add weights, which is going to be something that's going to supplement my strength and different things like that, if I don't do it in a balanced form, then now I'm kind of adding this disproportionality to the body. And so these are the 2 big pieces that I saw missing from a lot of the strength training that I saw. And this is kind of when Keegan talks about like Charles and Louis and things like that. Like these are really like these 2 big influences now brought into kind of athletic development and health and stuff like that. Like as he's talked about, like Louis is incredible at manipulating these strength curves and things like that to maximally develop somebody's squat with the different focus on speed squats, on banded squats, like all the different variations that they have to kind of target different ranges, different muscle groups. And then Charles with his focus on his numbers for ratios of structural balance, but being a little bit more up top, being a little bit more bodybuilding focused, where this almost to me looked like a more athletic version of bodybuilding. Like rather than building the ideal body to go out on stage, we're trying to build the ideal body to go out and perform in our sport. Like the idea, like how much of these exercises until we get kind of later on and we start really squatting with bands and things like that, like how much of this is super isolated muscles. Like we literally have 2 different variations of tibialis raises to target different parts of the strength curve of your freaking tip. Like the isolation and precision and stuff like this is what makes this super, super powerful. And then this kind of ties into this kind of global idea that Keegan has started to kind of coin and mention a lot is that our programming is going to be driven by limitation. So like whatever somebody's biggest limiting factor is, that's going to be the kind of starting point for our program. That's obviously going to be the biggest low hanging fruit, right? If somebody's super, super strong and super, super tight, do I really need to spend as much time? Like, is building more strength on top of that going to be my first and my biggest priority? No. So we're trying to find can I make the biggest improvement to their performance? And so that's where we can look at these numbers. We can look at these strength curves, to Graham's point about being able to quantify these different numbers and ratios and things like that. And we can pinpoint exactly like, okay, you're strong in this top range, you're strong in this mid range, bottom range needs work, or you're strong in your quads, your hand. Like, we can really isolate exactly where this is. And then we can take that almost bodybuilding approach to spend extra time there, depending on the timeline, whatever it is. Then we can have a much more targeted, specific approach we can be so much more confident in knowing exactly what our athlete needs, right? If any of you guys have ever been in more like team environments or college weight rooms and things like that, like how many times is the best athlete on the field the best athlete in the weight room? Or is the best athlete in the weight room the best athlete on the field? Never. So if that's the case, like clearly the metrics that we're using to gauge progress in the weight room aren't matching up to our performance on the field. Like, we don't need all of our soccer players to be squatting like double body weight, like ass to grass. Like, clearly the carryover is not there. So this gives us such a more precise and just accurate kind of measure to carry over to what is like gives me confidence that I know that I can give a person this and it's going to affect this on the field, which is one of the things that I love about how Ben talks about speed development, with the seated good morning being your explosive start, right? That extension where there's no other exercise that's going to bring my torso closer to my thighs. Think about a sprinter coming out of the blocks, like that's your 0 to 5. And then things like your split squat, your soleus, and your Nordic are going to be that kind of acceleration. And then your back extension, that top end range extended position, that's going to be your top speed. And like, you can look at it and see it and it almost kind of makes sense. And then it gives you so much more ability to have a very precise carryover where I can time my athletes on a 40-yard dash and I can get a 5, a 10, a 20, and a 40-meter split. Like, if I had lasers, I don't. But you get the idea. And I can be like, okay, so according to these times, like, you've got a great start, but your top speed sucks. So maybe we stop spending as much time in our good morning and we double up on our single leg back extension, something like that. And then to that point, one thing that has really changed or influenced how I program is because of how useful and how direct the carryover of some of these exercises are. Like, exercise selection has been the driver of my programming. So when we find a limitation, whether that's like mobility, whether that's hamstring strength or whatever it is, like, get this athlete and I know that he's a soccer player. He used to have a knee injury. So there are certain things that like, I know I want him to do. Like, we're going to spend a lot of time on the sled. We're going to spend a lot of time on our step ups. And then if he's pain free, like, we're going to progress him to our split squats and our VMO squats. So almost like you can just chuck that up on a whiteboard and like, these are the things I know I want to have. And then you can figure out like, okay, how do they piece them together? Like, obviously I want to start with the sled, then we go from inner range to kind of longer range to get the blood flow before we then get into some of the more connective tissue. But when you have this idea of these different exercises or these different needs that these athletes has, then that can drive your programming in the sense that you know exactly what you need, what you want to get done. And then you can figure out, okay, well, they are coming in twice a week. They're coming in 3 times a week. Like, then you can play with the sets and reps and the structure and how everything fits together and things like that. But that's been to Graham's point about simplification, a very simple, very powerful way for me to program is when like you'll just throw up on a board or on a piece of paper, like everything that you know you want to do with them. And then you figure out how it fits together without like doing RDLs and Nordics and Jefferson curls in the same day. So then now getting into some of what Keegan has started to talk about has kind of brought another kind of layer of understanding to this, for me at least, when he's really started talking about the influences of connective tissues and tendons and this idea of elasticity versus power and hardware versus software. One of the things that I don't think I appreciated enough about the system, about Ben's system in the early days, with this idea of strength through length and force curves or strength curves. I was so obsessed with the idea of strength curves and creating balance throughout all of them that you don't realize, or that I guess I neglected the idea of the tendons, and realizing that this outer range stuff is also going to have a benefit or a development for the tendons and for the connective tissue, rather than just being something that's going to train that outer range strength curve. So something like the sissy squat, I really didn't give enough attention to. I use it more as like an afterthought. So it's like, we've got our VMO squat, we've got our split squat. These we can really load. They're a little bit more fun than the sissy squat. Can seem a little bit almost like a party trick sometimes. But they're both getting that same kind of deep full knee bend. I don't need this one quite as much, without the realization that this outer range stuff is going to put more stress and then also going to further develop our tendons and our connective tissue a lot more. So it worked out this way in practice, in the sense of using the shorter range stuff for the step ups, for circulation, for healing, just because it seems like a natural progression to go from sleds to step ups to split squats or that sort of thing, but without necessarily understanding this concept of short range versus long range, this like recovery, healing, regeneration versus the more elastic connective tissue side of things. But it makes a lot of sense in the idea that, again, it just seemed like another thing that we were missing from a lot of the strength training that I was seeing going on. It was very muscle driven. It's very power driven. It's very output driven. The quote that I think Keegan posted up from Paula Quinn in one of his last lectures, the idea that the ability to kind of produce power does not necessarily develop power. That's definitely not a direct quote, but that concept. And that's the idea with box jumps, right? Like that's an expression of power. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. Not necessarily something that's going to develop power versus something like a box jump or a depth jump, where I'm getting that shock and that loading that's going to then develop the tendons and the connective tissue. And so that idea of development versus expression is something that I've started to take into account a lot more. And it's something that you definitely don't see as much in, again, these kind of like college weight rooms and things like that. And I get why, like it's hard for them. They have a season that they're working with, and they're also on like immense pressure to like produce results now. Right. But it's this idea of the last talk that I did, the last ATG call with some of the guys, talking about the toothpaste analogy. So if like you consider like a tube of toothpaste and you describe that as like, your goal is to squeeze out as much toothpaste from the tube as you can, right? If you think about that as someone's like athletic development that you're going to develop over the long term. If you just grab the toothpaste tube in the middle and you squeeze, you're going to get a lot to come out very quickly. But if your goal is to get as much toothpaste out of the tube as you can, to get somebody to develop as far as you possibly can, you need to start at the very bottom. You need to go a little bit slower, and you kind of need to run your thumbs down and have that little bit more methodical, long-term approach. And so that is what I think of when I think of this idea of elasticity and of tendons. Like we're very focused on building the muscle, building power, building output, building something now, versus we know tendons, connective tissue take much longer to develop, to remodel, and to build than something like a muscle. Again, to Graham's point about like steroids and stuff like that, like you can develop the muscle very quickly. And even if you're doing the right things for the tendons, which most of them probably aren't, it's still going to develop at a much slower rate than the muscles will. And it can leave you kind of exposed for injuries. But then also this idea of elasticity and the difference between a Cadorziani who could probably like maybe squat 1.5 times his body weight, but can jump out of the gym. Right. And so like, what is the difference between that athlete and like a power lifter who can squat 2.5 times his body weight, but like could barely grab the rim on a basketball hoop? And that's where this kind of idea of connective tissue dominance and elasticity and training the tendons has started to make a lot of sense. And how we can balance that out with our work in the weight room, how we know that like Olympic weightlifters and stuff like that, they have much thicker kind of quad and patella tendons than the average person because they catch really, really heavy loads in that deep squat, right? So it's that full bend that we're going to get that stretch and that stimulation for the tendons, for the ligaments. But then we can also get that from the impact of jumping 10,000 times like Kadorziani probably has. And so the knowledge that tendons react to two things. They react to load, so something that's going to be heavy and slow, and they also react to kind of more impact, something that's going to be more plyometric in nature. And getting into some of like Keith Barr's stuff, like there's a little bit of a different physiology in how they react to both, but both are going to be stimulatory and both are going to develop. But unless I'm getting the end range of motion for that heavy and slow, I'm not going to get that same development. So even though a jump is something that's not full range of motion, like most people, especially if they're a one leg jumper, like they're getting maybe a quarter squat, a quarter knee bend out of that, but they're getting so much load, they're getting fast, shocking loading through the tendon. That's why they can get such huge development out of that. But something like a box squat, even though it's super, super heavy, it's super, super low, we're never going to get that development because we don't get the load into the tendon enough. It's usually very hip dominant for most people, but also we're not getting into that full knee bend. And that's why we're creating problems in the weight room with our football players, with our linemen who can squat 600 pounds, but whose connective tissue in their knee is nowhere near as developed as that is. And so that's, I think, a kind of a missing piece that has kind of been a part of the system. Like if you're working through it on a kind of like a logical system, it's there, but maybe now with the lectures that Keegan's starting to bring out, like it's starting to tie some of this in together as like why we're using this, and gives us a few more tools and like how we can be strategic in terms of, now do I need to develop somebody's muscle, like the structure? Do they just need to be stronger in terms of, again, that relative strength, right, that Graham mentioned? That's the very first pillar in those 8 pillars that we talked about, is, are you pound for pound strong? There's I probably shouldn't even cite it because I don't know if it's true. I don't know when they tested it, but we're going to say it anyway. The story about Usain Bolt pulling like 3.9 times his body weight on an isometric mid-thigh pull was the strongest of any athlete that they tested in the study. I haven't been able to find a study, but I've heard multiple people source it, so we're going to pretend it's a thing. But it would make sense, right? Like the most explosive, fastest athlete in the world also being the strongest pound for pound. Like it makes a lot of logical sense. And then just to kind of wrap up that point is this idea of, when Keegan talks about hardware versus software, right? Do we want to focus on like biomechanics and making things look pretty? I think we've gone way, way too far in that realm already in terms of like landing mechanics and things like that. I think a lot of that's like kind of garbage. But this idea that give them the structure, like build an athlete's body, like to Aaron Lasso's point, like the Bo Jackson body type, build that, like give them that, and then they'll figure out the rest. Like they'll figure out the skill side of things on the field. Like do our job to just give them the tools to then go out and learn the sports skill, like learn the movement patterns. Like there's nothing that we can do in the gym, to Graham's point about like sports specificity, sports specific training, that's going to replicate anything that they're going to do out on the field with decision making, with game management, all the different factors that go into that. So rather than wasting our limited time, like give them the physical tools to go and compete and be pound for pound stronger, have better connective tissue, be more mobile, and then like let them go out there and let them develop the sports skill on their own. So just to wrap it up, just how I've been using this in kind of my own training and with my athletes. So kind of like Graham's development as well. I went from that 5'2" that I was talking about my freshman year when I was like actually a college athlete, to now like not really competing that much anymore, but I've run in the 4.6s on laser time. I'm definitely still trying to get that down. I want to get down into the 4.5s. That's my goal by the end of the year. So put that out there. You guys all heard me. And I've been in a lot of different a lot of different spheres. But I mean, like when I was talking about the different college environments, I've kind of interned as like a sports science, like one of those like kind of data collection guys doing heart rate variability and tracking distances with the men's soccer team at UCF. I've trained one of the national champion teams there, the cheer team, which actually, like, it sounds funny because it's cheerleading, but they actually had some freaks, like the guys. There's one guy on that team that had a 43.5-inch like standing vertical. Like, it was insane. A couple of former Orlando City guys. One guy's even trained with the Canadian national team. And the reason I'm just bringing that up is because across the board, whether it's what I've seen personally or what they've told me about their own training, like, there's so much room to improve this, especially in the world, like for me and Graham, like with soccer guys, like the 2 Orlando City guys that I trained, like they talked about their training was just doing like 5-minute, like doing push-ups out on the field and like 5-minute abs and things like that. Like, this is at like almost the highest level of like professional soccer that there is. Like, some of this, like, there's obviously going to be better at some places than others, but some of this stuff is a joke. Like, so there's so much opportunity for kind of us as coaches to be on the forefront of this. Like, as this starts to grow, as players start to come in, like athletes, especially higher level athletes, if that's what you want to do, like, they're usually pretty smart, especially like kinesthetically. Like, they know something when they feel it, they can know like, okay, this feels right. And that's the response that I've gotten from a lot of guys in a very short amount of time. Like, you give them, they get a taste of this, there's something that they're going to want more. And so just knowing that this is such a powerful tool to be able to implement in whatever setting that is. The last point down here is probably half of the guys that I work with are athletes that just want to like totally clean bill of health, just want to be better athletes, just want to perform better. But then the other half are guys that are coming off of ACL, meniscus, like all these different things. Like, these are all guys that I've used the ATG stuff step by step going through. We're going to go through our backwards sled. We're going to go through our step ups at a level that you can do without any pain. That feels good. Okay, we're going to start working our VMO squats where you're literally like hanging onto a rack. So you've got 20 pounds maybe in that bottom position, but we're going to start to get into that full knee bend to start to get a little bit of stimulation for the tendons. And we're going to start to do that one side at a time. Like, this system, this scalability and things like that, it works at all of these levels. And we've gotten guys back to doing things they didn't think they were going to do before. Like, one of the videos I posted up was a couple of guys with like ACL surgeries, big old scar on the front of their knee, like doing sissy squats and things like that. Like, there is a lot of potential for all this in whatever application that you want to try. Like, Ben talks about his mom training the system all the time. Like, my mom does the same thing. Like, she's doing split squats and reverse step ups on out back, like on the porch before she goes and runs and things like that. So whether you want to be coaching pro athletes, whether you just want to be helping people get out of pain, I guess the last thing with that, so to kind of wrap up, coming back to my ankle surgery, right? There's such a gray area between physical therapy and return to sport or athletics, or even just people wanting to feel good in general. There's within physical therapy, I have a little bit, I'm not a huge fan of the industry in general. I mean, I guess you could say that about personal training as well. Just the standards are not great. Like, there's some physical therapists that are amazing. There's some that are not so much. But we have such a room to kind of work with athletes or work with people to get them from physical therapy back on the field. So the majority of athletes, all these guys with ACL, meniscus, MCL, things like that, like, I'm not doing rehab with them. Like, they're going to go, like, tore your ACL, like, I'm sorry, like, get your surgery, do your rehab. But once you've done your rehab and they've gotten you 80% back, which is what they normally do, like, they're happy if you can walk again without pain. Like, they're still so far from being able to go back out onto the field, right? And so that's where we have the ability to come in and, like, we're going to get you back to not just 100% of where you were when you got injured, because obviously that wasn't a good enough level if we had a non-contact injury. Now, if you got hit by a bus, that's another thing. But we now have tools that we can take you from where you were even before you got hurt to now not only getting you back on the field, getting you performing at a level that's even greater than you were at before any of that stuff happened. And so that's where I'm actually finding a lot of success with that kind of return to sport, that kind of gray area niche of guys that they're not quite hurt enough for physical therapy, but like, they don't feel great when they train and that sort of thing. So there's just so many different applications for this that it really applies to anything that you want to apply it to. So I guess that's just my kind of last little nugget is get the most out of this that you can. And there's lots of room. There's lots of kind of application for this wherever you guys want to use it. Thanks. Hope that was insightful.
Well done, guys. Yeah, really cool to hear your perspectives and experiences with it. You know, Graham's running it more in a private sort of gym setting, groups, has his own gym. Zach's had experiences there within the college setting, and now kind of individual athletes, you know, coming back from teams, etc. Yeah, the idea, I guess, we're just getting started with this, and I didn't know exactly what we're going to get today, but I think that these guys have both shown their passion and depth of knowledge about ATG. And I think, we don't want everyone to say the same thing and believe in exactly the same thing, but that's, what we want to express in terms of the fast track. Like, I've been getting results with this. I know it inside out. I've tested different ideas. This is where I think we might, some of the things that I've been playing with, like, that's what, want to see. And everyone's going to come from a different background, which is going to make it different and unique. Yeah, I'd love to hear some thoughts from you guys. If you had big takeaways there, or things you want to share with Graham or Zach. I got a few notes.
I want to say good job, you guys. The presentations were really good. I had a question that I think was asked also in the chat of how are you using some of these things to kind of help develop the college athletes and putting some of the ATG kind of syllabus, you would say, in the training models in college. How does that work with you guys?
Yeah, so I just saw a Stuart question. So yeah, kind of the same thing. Cop out answer, it depends. So for me, like I'm working kind of independently at a gym where they basically just you basically pay rent and you do your own thing. So I'm not associated with any teams, any schools, any things like that. Like I have a lot of guys coming from kind of local colleges and things like that. They're doing that on their own time, like on their own bill, like that whole sort of thing. So I like that model because it gives me a lot of freedom to do exactly what I want. And that's why I kind of left one of those more like kind of D1, like Graham was talking about, one of those more like kind of private sports performance facilities, because like they have their model and they want to do it their way. And if it's hard to fit some of that stuff in terms of how would you actually apply that in a team setting, it's going to 100% depend on how much wiggle room you have. Like if you're Cal Dietz over at University of, I don't know where he's at, you can do anything you want with those guys. Like he's talked about, he's like taped their entire teams like mouth shuts before, and like the ADs walked by and kind of just nodded and kept going. Like that's power. Like most people would get fired if you tried something like that. So it's really just going to depend on what kind of buy-in do you have from the athletes? What kind of trust do you have from the coaches? Like, can you justify this? Like when somebody comes up to you, like one of the athletic directors or the coaches, or like, what the heck is this? Like, why aren't we squatting? Like, can you just straight up give them kind of some of these like principles of like, we're working on their connective tissue, yada, 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 you know what I mean? And kind of just spit something out right there and be like, have a valid reason for why you're doing this, and like be able to kind of demonstrate that you really know why you're doing this, then you're probably to get away with more of it. But again, a lot of it's just going to depend on the amount of the role you're in, like, and the amount of freedom that you have. If you're the assistant strength coach and the head coach is a traditional guy, like good luck. But
yeah, I'll add to that. One of the things you can think about is start with what you can get away with. So keep it small and simple. So at the very least, you can add in more of a, like the knee flow and the warm-ups are really hitting sets, the tibialis, calf raises, and hip flexor stuff, either as accessories throughout the training or as part of the warm-up. So starting with changing the way the warm-up is done and the things you prioritize is the low-hanging fruit. And you can do that with anybody, right? You don't have to change anything else, but slowly over time, you can add in things and let the warm-up blend to other parts of it. And the other part, when it comes to any type of coach, AD, or other, like anybody you're doing, lead with communication. You want to talk about, because it's like, I'm a big fan of sales, and everything we do as coaches is selling. Even if you're in it's easier if you're in a trapped audience like college or a school setting. You're still selling to the athletes why they should try, and you're selling to the AD, you're selling to the coach. If you're in a private industry, you're selling to everybody. but lead with that communication, right? If they don't want to do it, it's either a fear or lack of understanding. You can help them understand with more knowledge by communicating and doing something to kind of walk along them. But first, ask questions, seek to be curious, and seek to understand what their position is so that you can address that. Because it's not that they're like, oh, I want you to do squats. If you're the professional, they don't fucking know what they're doing. But if they don't know what they're doing, then walk and ask questions. And, oh, yeah, why did this when I was growing up? Okay, that's good. You know, something, you know, and you can get them to feel heard. Does that make sense? So it's less about beating them over the head with like, this is a superior training philosophy, and more about like holding their hand as they get used to the unfamiliar, so to speak. We're in a sales position. Yes.
Yeah, I think some of it's just labels as well, right? Like you can say, look, in the next phase we're going to be squatting more, or you know, you can just bias with volume. You can call it stretching, because initially a lot of the guys won't be able to handle much load on a split squat or a Jefferson curl. You know, you could have them pull on the back of their legs rather than actually holding weight, and then no one's going to ask a question. Like if you just call it stretching and you teach them how to stretch. But you know, some of that stuff, like you can basically get done what you want to get done without telling them anything, especially, yeah, as Graham was saying with the warm-ups. You know, I think that's smart. And as you start to get better results, and as the athletes are raving about it, and as their children are doing better, or whoever it is, like, then they're gonna start to come around, and they're gonna be, you know, more interested in your innovation. But yeah, to an untrained eye, you can kind of bluff a lot of it in, I think. And I just sort of had a bit of a realization thinking about that short to long, because we're doing some of this extreme long range stuff where you're getting that tug of war from both ends. I haven't gone into too much detail about this because I don't want to confuse it too much, but the extreme long range stuff where it's really maximally pulling from both ends, like in a standing good morning or an RDL, or like the slant board Jefferson is kind of the extreme of that, right? If you're using a significant weight in that, you can literally you can really remodel the fascia in the lower back. Like it's really aggressive. Those movements don't need to be progressed to low reps. Like they can just be used in sort of higher reps and gentle, like with the KOT squat as well. Like I think it's much more suited to, you know, moderate to higher reps, or partials in the bottom position. You find that if you just do partials in the bottom position, which I know Zach's been playing around with, even on the split squats, you know, just hanging out down in that bottom position, get some time there, and using partials is a lot less aggressive with the connective tissues. But if I don't think we need a lot of load with a lot of those movements to get a lot of the benefits. And if by, you know, thinking of it that way, like it becomes a less aggressive kind of system. It's kind of a cool novelty to be like, you know, pulling a, you know, heavy Zercher Jefferson on the slant and whatnot. But like having played around with that stuff hard and like touching my elbows to my feet and whatnot, like it really does pull on the lower back, and you can get like fascial soreness that lasts for a week. And you probably don't need to be doing that with your, you know, with your top line people. Like it's good that I've experienced that, and it's good. I don't mind if you guys go too far with stuff, because as coaches, like I think it's almost our job of like, yeah, that was really dumb, and I won't be teaching anyone that one anytime soon. Yeah, like I think that's if you realize that those micro doses are all that's needed in some of those things, then it kind of makes it less intimidating, I think.
Yeah. And one thing to build on that too, it goes to the communication, like knowing exactly what Keegan was saying. Well, we have standards we're trying to get to for, you know, I was joking with Zach about this. We have standards for we're trying to get to, and then we, you know, get a certain number of clients to that level. If, you know, athletes, if they don't have a lot of time, or like Zach's got a lot of guys are injured, and it's kind of like they have their goals and priorities first. So when it comes to like training athletes, you can't say, well, I really need you to be able to do a handstand, so we're just going to do that today. So keep in mind that like you've got a bigger process at play there. And so if they don't hit a certain number of reps, or maybe they can't do you know, it's good to be able to work long term, but don't get caught up in your ego saying, I need you to be able to, you know, hit this out. You know, hit this out more valuable.
The minimal essential dose is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, having patience. I was listening to Louis Simmons talk about like everything's at least a 4-year cycle Ben's talking a lot about everything's a 2-year, 2 years is kind of the minimum. And I think if you have that kind of mind going into that, Alex, like I know you're about to go into college system and you've been working with some high school kids, like you don't need to get it all done straight away where everybody can handle body weight in the bottom of a split squat. If they can just handle, body weight on their back, if they can just handle their own body weight and they can hang out down there and they're getting comfortable, then that's a huge win in your first few months or even in your first year. Like it's not, you'll get big benefits out of that. I think like the strength endurance in those positions, I would value highly as well. So yeah, yeah, you go.
Yeah, if you something I was going to say along those lines, as far as like working with people and communicating with people, and the confidence in getting people like sold on the long-term progress and just the big picture is, well, first of all, like the better you know it, the better we educate ourselves on this, like Keegan was saying, exploring these things, and the better we know, the more people we take through the process, the more confident we become, and then helping, coach those people through. A lot of people aren't going to understand what you're doing, and a lot of other strength coaches are going to question you. And what this came to my mind when you were asking that was Tom Brady. And have you ever heard of Alex Guerrero? You guys know who that is?
This is right.
TB12. Have you heard of the TB12 clinic?
I've heard of it.
So Alex Guerrero used to work on me. He's from Utah. When I was in the AFL, he used to work on me, and he went out. Nobody with the New England Patriots organization, their strength coach, their staff, nobody knew who he was. Nobody trusted him. And a lot of people felt like he was stepping on people's toes, but he wanted to help people. And that's what we're trying to do. We want to help athletes. At the end of the day, we're trying to help people. And I'm telling you, the more people we help, the more the word will get out. As Ben is getting phone calls from athletes that are looking for solutions will start to search you out, and they will go around what they're doing. And that's not to say that, no disrespect to their strength coaches at all, but the TB12 clinic was born out of somebody like you that had the confidence to say, hey, I can help you, Tom Brady. And he went and did Tom Brady's ACL recovery. And Tom Brady decided that right then and there, he said, Alex, you're my guy. He paid Alex to move his whole clinic from Utah out to New England, where they over time, they created the TB12 clinic, which is right outside of the New England Patriots practice facility. They actually built a facility where, I don't know if you know this, but the New England Patriots, they have a strength and conditioning staff, but players started going over to the TB12 clinic. And still to this day, Rob Gronkowski, Wes Welker, all their knee recoveries were done by Alex and his team. So the reason I know them so well is because one of their guys, Hayden, still works on me. They're soft tissue guys. They do a lot of, they're more like massage therapy, but they're all about pliability and soft tissues and connective tissue stuff as well. And I'm actually going to see Hayden this week. And so maybe I'll ask him how they got around that relationship and how they work with those guys, because I know Hayden, he has personal contracts now with NFL players individually. So he'll actually go to the Dallas Cowboys. He'll be there on the sidelines for their games, working on Sean Lee, working on some of their players. He would work on Troy Polamalu. And he has like individual players, Adam Vinatieri, where they fly him out. He works on them, kind of soft tissue stuff, massage therapy, day before the game, day of the game, stuff like that. And so that dynamic that you're talking about, as far as working with athletes when they have other coaches and other teams and stuff like this, some of that stuff is going to come along the way as you figure it out. And I'm telling you right now, the best thing we could be doing is gaining the confidence with helping athletes. The more confident you are helping these people, those conversations we had, and you'll work your way through those things. I know right now, for some people here, you're just trying to pay your bills and help people. You're trying to, right now, it's like, how can I help as many people? How can I teach as many people? And eventually you can get to that place. But where more people know about ATG, and they'll be calling you rather than you searching out people. But that was just my one little bit of advice, is nobody knew who Alex Guerrero was. People still question him to this day. Now everybody wants to know what Alex Guerrero does. Everybody wants to know, what is this TB12 method? And, you know, I believe that'll be the same with ATG here in the future. Everyone will really want to be, you know, they'll be seeking out ATG coaches, qualified coaches. So the best thing you could be doing right now, I would say, is get super confident, because preparation precedes that confidence. The more you prepare, the more you take people through it, the better you'll be. And then the better you'll be at having those conversations with those teams and those athletes, and the more confident they'll become. Now the New England Patriots, think about that. He came in an NFL team. That organization has just kind of accepted the fact that the TB12 clinic is right there next to Patriot Place. And now obviously Tom Brady's gone to Tampa and taken Alex with him. But just to your point, that's all I was going to say was, you know, just the more confident we are, the more we just want to help people, and we are able to help people, that'll all take care of itself.
Yeah. And I think it's going to change fast. You know, it's the information age. I really don't think that, I think it's just so intuitive as well. Like a lot of coaches, when they've watched these lectures, they send me a message and just go like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, that's what I'm going to be thinking with that paradigm from here forward. Like, it's pretty hard to refute. It's really like, I haven't had anyone try and come to me so far and say, you know, that doesn't make any sense. Now we've got a better platform to bring this stuff to the table and say, hey, you know, how can we systemize this a little bit more? How can we look at progression of tonnage over time? Some of these principles. Yeah. So I'm challenging you basically to kind of bring some ideas forward. And you might think, well, I'm going to keep them for myself and my athletes. But I think you can see the benefits of being open source in this time. Like, if you're a valuable contributor to this community, good things will flow towards you. You know, Graham's already got, you know, one of these college guys. I've recommended maybe 5 people to Zach so far in Florida. I don't know if they're all making it to him yet. Like, it's not a very slick system yet, but it's definitely already happening. Yeah. They're not all local to you either, but they can drive. And, you know, even just getting a one-off session with people who are fanatics of ATG, their knowledge of ATG is going to jump like ridiculously in 1 or 2 hours with you. There was a guy just had a session in Brisbane. He's been on ATG for 6 months. He did a session with a coach, and he's just like, oh, now I understand it. Like, now it's, you know, so this is, it's going to be epic.
And that's also what he just said is a great thing you can sell. So like the guy I'm working with, you know, I sold him on a $700 3-week package, but it's all remote. And then he's going to because they're 2 hours, an hour and a half or 2 hours away. So he'll drive up and see me at the gym once, if not twice. But it's, you can use people. Like, what I'm getting at is, you don't have to reinvent what Ben's doing with the whole online thing. You can encourage people to go say, hey, sign up for this. And then you sell a package that works. You come and see me once a week and we work on whatever the rest of it is. But like, don't feel the pressure of saying, I need to go and do. You're not going to compete with the amount of stuff Ben's got, how smooth and fluid that ATG program is, and how low the price point is. Don't even try. I encourage everyone. I'm like, if you get $50, do this. It's like, even people I'm talking to in person, do this. And if you want to come and see me, then you could charge whatever it is. You do like a 90-minute session once a month, whatever, for 150, 250, whatever it is. Think about ways you can get yourself out of the commodity space. And I think that's the beauty of this, is like, don't compete with online stuff, and don't compete with having to be the next, like, you know, scalable membership solution. Be the best coach you can, and then sell accordingly to that. And then let this stuff work with you, right? Don't take that pressure off yourself to do it all.
Yeah. The $50 is like, it's a gateway. It's an entry to people who you were probably never going to train. And now you become they're in your target because they took that option. If they've only got $50 a month, then they're probably not in your business group anyway. Like, it just can't afford you. But if Ben introduces them to the system, and then, I just think there's so much opportunity locally. Like, I would be being as clear and loyal about being part of this. Like, all those CrossFit spin-off gyms, very few of them did anywhere near as good as the places that were just, they were CrossFit, and they went really hard at it and they were dedicated to it. And I just think that's what's going to happen with this. Like, if you're the guy in your town that has the cool gym, that has the non-motorized treadmills, you have a speed gate, you have the Nordic benches, you have the tip bars, like, how cool is that place going to be? The people go in there, they have a common language, they're already completely, excited, indoctrinated, whatever. Like, they know the ATG buzz, and they're going to be talking about Ben's latest YouTube video. And, I just think that opportunity is going to take off. But it's going to be hybrid, like Graham says. Like, if you see people once a month, once a week, once every 2 weeks, you travel to them, they travel to you. Kids, elderly people, celebrities, pro athletes, the online doesn't suit them that well. Honestly, everybody needs to see someone for a face-to-face session from time to time, and that's just going to become really normal. Like, testing days, have a testing day once a month, everybody local to me, it's going to happen, and the technology is going to get better. So yeah, I just want to see, the challenge is just on us to get as good as, to get really good at this and to be really knowledgeable, and for Ben to be getting amazing feedback of like I went to this guy, he was so good. Ben's employing 1 or 2 ATG coaches every week as well, which is a really cool opportunity to be on, a strong salary, and then you can go and do that hybrid stuff on the side with extra credibility. There's definitely opportunities here. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel, as Graham says, like thinking about putting your own slant on it. And some people are going to do that, and that's fine as well. Like, there's no restriction on anything. I just think there's also that opportunity within what's going on. I think we're getting to the end of the buzz for today. But hopefully you've got the idea now what's going on with the fast track. I'll go to as well, Graham. But I do want to get guys fast tracked. We're not trying to be tedious with this system. We just don't want to give out pieces of paper that just are meaningless, because everyone can get one instantly. It is going to be a 2-year process for most guys, and that's okay. If you do the work and you're really enthusiastic and you're showing up and you get massive progress and you're getting results, come to us and let's get you fast tracked. Like, that's what we want to do. We need coaches, as Ben's saying. There's if for every NFL athlete, etc., that's putting their hand up, like Graham is at the moment, for every pro athlete that's wanting to be a part of this, there's like 500 or 1,000, young kids, other people that kind of have that same question but don't really know what to do. Like, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.